Welcome back, everyone. In this section, we are going to have a detailed discussion on Membership Service Provider or MSP. In the previous section, we have learned how to modify the world state database configuration, how to modify or add orderer configuration and ordering service, how to configure Hyperledger Fabric containers, how to define network config option, how we are enabling TLS, and how we are generating Genesis flow. These are the things that we have learned in the last section. In this section, we are going to learn more about membership service provider, and in that we are going to address how to configure ACL, which is access control list, how to create end user identity, revoking an identity, and configure and start Hyperledger Fabric CA, which is certification authority. Let's move on to the first subtopic, which is access control list. So, Fabric uses ACL to manage access to resources by associating to a policy. A policy is nothing but a specific rule that evaluates to true or false. Fabric contains a number of default ACL. So this topic is already covered in Fabric policies in the previous section. If you want to refresh your memory, please go back to those slides and have a look and read those lectures and come back and continue watching. Access control defaults exist inside config.tx.yaml file. The file, this file is fed to config.tx.gen tool, which uses this file and builds the channel configuration. So, access control can be uploaded or updated in two ways. First is editing config.tx.yaml, which will be used when creating a new channel configuration. The second is updating access control in a channel configuration of an existing channel. Let us go and see both of this. So first one is editing config.tx.yaml. So ACLs are formatted as key value pair consist of a resource function name followed by a string. As you can see in this example, which is ACL policy for invoking chain codes on peer and ACL policy for sending block events. As you can see on the first example, the access to the left hand side, which is peer/propose, is restricted to identities satisfying the policies defined at the canonical path, which is the right hand side, which is /channel/application/writer. And it is the same for the second example as well. The access to event/block is restricted to identities satisfying the policies defined at the canonical path channel/application/reader. This is the explanation that I have just given for the previous slide. If you want, you can read it again to grasp more. Next is updating ACL defaults in config.tx.yaml. In cases where it is necessary to override ACL defaults when bootstrapping a network or to change ACL before a channel has been bootstrapped. So the best practice is to update in your config.txgen itself. Next is create end user identity. So here you will find different steps. So first is enrolling the bootstrap identity. So if needed, you can customize the CSR, which is certificate signing request section in the client configuration file. So you have different properties, and one of the properties, which is clr.cn field, it must be set to the ID of the bootstrap identity. So the default certificate signing request values are shown in the next slide. So which is this one. So if you can see, this is the code snippet for enrolling the bootstrap identity. In this you have different fields and couple of them are a couple of them have some default values. For example, CN is the common name and O is the organization name, which we have given the value as Hyperledger Fabric. You have OU, which is organization unit. We have given Fabric CA as the value. Then we have L, which is the location or city. Then we have ST, which is the state. We have given it as North Carolina. And you have C as well. So, which is name of the country. So, right now in this code snippet, we have mentioned it as US. So, this is the code snippet where we will be handling the properties in order to enroll the bootstrap identity. This is just the example or the attributes which I have explained in the previous code snippet. Moving on. Next is enrolling the bootstrap identity. So Fabric CA client is responsible for enrolling the enrolling an identity. So Fabric CA client, which you can see here, is the command that is used to enroll an identity. For example, if you see in this code snippet, so you can see Fabric CA client command is enrolling an identity, and that identity is nothing but it is having an admin privilege. I mean, admin as the username and admin PW as the password, and this is calling Fabric CA server as a endpoint. If you can see where you are calling the http/admin pw, which is the password @ localhost 7054. Localhost 7054 is where your Fabric CA server is running. So the enroll command stores an enrollment certificate, which is ECERT, corresponding to private key and certification authority certificate chain PEMP files in the subdirectory of Fabric CA's client's MSP directory. Next is registering a new identity. The identity performing the register request must be currently enrolled and must have the proper authority to register the type of an identity that is being registered. As part of this process, it goes through 3 authorization checks that are made by Fabric CA server during the registration process of a new identity. That process involves: first is the registrar or the invoker must have the property hf.register.roles attribute with a comma separated list of values where one of the values is equal to the type of identity that is being registered. Next check is the affiliation of register must be equal to or prefix of the affiliation of identity that is being registered previously. Next, as part of the third process, the registrar can register an identity with the attributes if all of the following conditions are satisfied, which is registrar can register Fabric CA reserved attributes that have the prefix hf dot, and only if the registrar processes the attributes and it is part of the value of this property, which is hf.register.attributes property. Then registering custom attributes. This requires that the register has hf.register.attributes with the value of the attribute or the pattern that is being registered as well. One important thing to notice here is you can give the pattern also as a value to an attribute, which is hf.register.attributes. So if the registered attribute name is hf.register.attributes, an additional check is performed to see if the requested values for this attribute are equal to or a subset of register's value for hf.register.attributes. So in order to learn more about these registering a new identity, you can go through the course material that is attached with this course. There you will get much more examples to see the identification scenario for registering a new identity. Next is revoking an identity. As we have seen in the previous sessions that we can also revoke an identity if in case the certificate is old or certification needs to be revoked or something of that scenario. So an identity or the certificate can be revoked. Revoking an identity will revoke all the certificates owned by the identity and will also prevent that the identity from it prevents the identity from getting any new certificates. So revoking a certificate will invalidate a single certificate. So, in order to revoke a certificate or an identity, the calling identity must have the property which is hf.revoker and hf.register.roles attribute. The revoking identity can only revoke a certificate or an identity that has an affiliation that is equal to or prefixed by revoking identity's affiliation. Furthermore, the revoker can only revoke identities with the types that are listed in the property, which is hf register.roles, which belongs to revokers. For example, as you can go through this, as you can see this example, the revoker with affiliation args.arg1 and the property hf.register.roles is equal to peer or client attributes can revoke either peer or client type of identity affiliated with args.arg1 or args.arg1.department, but it cannot revoke an identity affiliated to args.arg2 or of any other type, meaning it can only revoke only the type peer or client, not admin and the other types. And also it's the same, so if it is affiliated with this organization which is args.org1, it can revoke only for that particular organization and the subsets the and the and the certificates that are associated with that particular organization, not the certificates of other organization. So the following command disables an identity and revokes all of the certificates associated with the identity. So all future requests received by the Fabric CA server from this identity will be rejected. So this is the command that we will use in order to revoke the certificates, in order to disable an identity and also revoke the certificate. So this is kind of like a deeper understanding of how revoking an identity works. So an IDE mix CRI, which is credential revocation information, is similar in the purpose to an X509 CRL to invoke what is previously issued. However, there are some differences between X509 CRL and also IDE mix CRI. So in X509, the issuer revokes an end user certificate and its ID is included in the CRL. The verifier checks to see if the user certificate is in the CRL, and if so, it returns an authorization failure. The end user is not involved in this revocation process other than receiving an authorization error from the verifier. So this is some more extra information about IDE mix. So in IDE mix, the end user is involved. The issuer revokes an end user's credential similar to X509 and evidence of this revocation is recorded in the CRI. The CRI is given to the end user which is also called as prover. So the end user then generates a proof that their credential has not been revoked according to the CRA. So the end user gives this proof to the verifier who wants to verify the proof according to the CRA. For verification to be succeeded, the version of the CRI used by the end user and the verifier must be the same. So if it is same, that means you can go ahead and the revocation is been successful and the verification matches. If you want to get more information about how to revoke an identity and other registering the identities in Hyperledger Fabric, please go through the course materials which we have attached along with this PPT. Next is how we are going to configure and start Hyperledger Fabric CA, which is Certification Authority. So we have a diagram coming up which will explain you how the Fabric CA server and Fabric client interacts with each other. So there are two ways of interacting with Hyperledger Fabric CA. That is, one first way is via Hyperledger Fabric CA client, or it's through Fabric SDKs. So all communications in Hyperledger Fabric CA is via REST API calls. Let me explain you this diagram. So this diagram, you can see two major component. One is Fabric CA server and Fabric CA client. As you can see, Fabric CA root server will be associated with the Fabric CA intermediate server. And the intermediate server can have multiple server for high availability. So if you see, this is a single server, but internally it might be a cluster of other servers, other Fabric CS server, and it is maintained by this intermediary server. Or you can also have the same cluster of this CS server as well. This improves the high availability for your Fabric architecture or Fabric network. So Fabric CA client connects to the intermediate server, which is the Fabric CA server, or it can also directly connect to the cluster of Fabric CA server. Then you have SDKs in order to communicate between the Fabric CA server and also peers. So this is an explanation where you can see the interaction between the Fabric CA client and Fabric CA server, and how your peers uses SDK in order to talk to Fabric CA server. So this is just the explanation what I have given before. So these are much more detailed information of how and why this high availability proxy endpoint is needed and things like that. So just to glance through these points, the Hyperledger Fabric CA client or SDK may connect to the server in a cluster of Hyperledger Fabric CA server. This is illustrated in the top right section of the diagram in the previous slide, which is the right section which I have told here. Next is the client routes to an high availability proxy endpoint which load balances the traffic to one of the Fabric CA server cluster member. So when it comes to high availability, the more number of servers means the high your high availability is achieved. So if you have more number of servers which can serve the users, which means none of the users request will go unnoticed by the server. So all Hyperledger Fabric CA servers in a cluster share the same database for keeping track of identities and certificates. In LDAP, if LDAP is configured, the identity information is kept in LDAP rather than the database. So LDAP is again a detailed configuration. So if you want to learn more about LDAP, please take other courses as well or Google it as well. So a server may contain multiple certification authorities. Each certification authority is either a root certification authority or an intermediate certification authority. So each intermediate certification authority has a parent CA, which is either a root CA or another intermediate CA. This is nothing but the root CA and intermediate CA, and this can be connected to this is the intermediate server is connected to a root server. Moving on, how are you going to configure and start the Hyperledger Fabric CA? So in order to initialize the Fabric CA server, you need to run this command, which is Fabric CA server init -b and the credentials over here, which is admin password. So the server configuration file contains the certificate signing request, which is CSR section that can be configured. We have already seen a code snippet where CSR is enrolled with the bootstrap identity section. Then how are you going to start the server? So Fabric CA server start is the command which is used to start your Fabric CA server. So if the server has not been previously initialized, it will initialize itself as a start for the first time. So during this initialization, the server will generate a CA cert PEM file and CA key PEM files. So if they don't exist, it will also create a default configuration file if it doesn't exist. So this is the command which is majorly used to start the Fabric CA client. If you are not understanding how this command is executed, when we go to the lab section, I am going to execute this command and I'm going to show it to you how it is starting the server in the logs. So you can also upgrade the Fabric CA server. So the Fabric CA server must be upgraded before upgrading the Fabric CA client. So prior to upgrade, it is suggested that the current database should be backed up. So if you are using Squite 3, back up the current database, which is named under Fabric CA fabric-ca-server.db by default. So for other database type, use the appropriate backup or replication mechanism. So to upgrade single instance of Fabric CA server, you have to follow certain process. First is you have to stop the Fabric CA server process and you have to ensure that the backup has been taken for the current database and you have to replace previous Fabric CA server binary with the upgraded version. Then you have to launch the Fabric CA server process and you have to verify the Fabric CA server process is available with the command where you can reach that particular server, and that command is Fabric CA client and get CA info. User it will be HTTP and where your server is running. So in this example, if you take your host as a local host, then in the local host at port 47054 is where your Fabric server is running. So if you want to get more information about this process, you have to go through the course material attached along with this PPTs. So that is it for this lecture. I know this is an elaborated view, but the certification authority in Hyperledger Fabric might be confusing. So please go through all the course material to get understanding of what we have talked before. And if you have any questions or any follow-up that has to be done, please feel free to ask. And also we do provide private tutoring sessions as well. So please do subscribe for the private tutoring session from Coding Bootcamps. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next section.